Hi, everyone, and welcome to Bad Bleeps of the Bible. If you weren't here last episode, be sure to check out that story of our femme fatale JL. And before we start our story today, just a quick bit of housekeeping and a reintroduction of me, since this is only the second episode. If you've already heard it and you don't want to hear it again, feel free to skip ahead about a minute or so. But for those of you new here, hi. Hello again. My name is Scott. I'm your podcast host, creator, Bible guide, and resident PK. What's a PK? Well, it's a pastor's kid. This means that I grew up very, very religious. I went to church 3 times a week, Sunday morning for Sunday school, and then the morning service, evening service, and then Wednesday services. Lots of service. And then I also went to a Christian school, air quotes, growing up as well, where we had Bible class every single day. We learned Bible theology, Bible stories. We had chapels, a lot of religion. And now today, I am very not religious, much to my parents' chagrin. Though something stuck from my background, and those were the fascinating stories from the Bible. And that's why we're here today, to demystify the Bible, but also tell these really cool stories. And then so, what's a bleep? Why is that in the title? Well, it's whoever we're talking about for today. Initially, this podcast was going to be called Bad Itches with a B of the Bible, but because we'll be talking about a lot of different characters and we wanted to keep it semi-clean, I decided to use the word bleep, and we can fill that in for whoever we're talking about that day. So that's it. I'm so thrilled to introduce you to today's bleep and controversial, questionable hero of the story, Balaam. Today, our story comes from the book of Numbers in the Old Testament. Now, if you were here last time, you should remember that there are 2 testaments in the Bible. The Old Testament, think beginning of time and all of that, and the New Testament, think Jesus plus, everything after Jesus. Additionally, a question came up when I was discussing this podcast with my friend, and I wanted to bring that up because I figured it might be a question that more people might have. He asked me what first the original language of the Bible was, and then how it was that we came to so many translations, the NIV, the NKJV, the KJV. Well, the answer is a bit complicated. Remember, I'm not a Bible scholar, but this was a serious point that was brought up all the time when I was growing up in the church and in Bible class a lot. So I'm just going to tell you what I was taught, and you can take it or leave it. So, the Old Testament language was originally written in Hebrew and some Aramaic, while the New Testament language was a hodgepodge of Aramaic, Hebrew, and then later Greek. So obviously the question becomes then, are translations of these testaments different? And the answer is yes. And if you were my dad, you would have strong opinions about which version/translation is the best. For him, that was the King James Version, written in 1611 as the definitive translation. And the reason for this is that it adheres mostly to, I guess, the oldest translations that we have from those original languages. It has stayed the same for the longest amount of time, and this gets very much in the weeds, but it's based on a translation by a dude named Erasmus called the Textus Receptus. Remember, though, all of that being said, this is not a theology podcast, so you know we #do not care about translations, since we're just here for some juicy stories. But do know that when I'm reading from what I call the text or the Bible, I'm doing so out of the KJV just because that's what I grew up with. Some things truly never leave you. So we're in the book of Numbers from the Old Testament, which is the 4th book of the Hebrew Bible. And the name Numbers actually doesn't mean 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, it comes from an old Hebrew word meaning in the wilderness. And Numbers is broken up into 3 sections based on where the Israelites were wandering at that time. And finally, if you ever hear me reference the children of Israel during this story, know that this is just a fancy way of saying the people of Israel who, as you might have guessed, were all descendants of Jacob, whose name was later changed to Israel. Lots of name changing in the Old Testament. And a strong side note about Jacob, you may recognize him from Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, the musical. He had 12 sons, and these 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. There also may be a YouTube video of me somewhere in that show, unless I have successfully scrubbed it from existence. Anywho, that was a lot of exposition and Bible facts, but I think it's important to really lay the groundwork for our story and where we're starting today. So now, let's get into it. This is a story of Balaam, who, though he followed God's command, he ultimately becomes an enemy of Israel and is actually name-dropped in the New Testament centuries later for his actions. Drama. Our story begins in the plains of Moab, which in what is now today Jordan. We see King Balak of Moab. He was the leader of the people of Moab. He's terrified because of the approach of a giant group of peoples that have just fled Egypt and who are currently tearing through the countryside on their way to the promised land. These people were the children of Israel. And honestly, Balak really did have reason to be afraid. The Israelites had already decimated and destroyed the land of the Amorites, who they were just in, and now are slowly making their way into his territory. Rather than offering peace, though, and just letting them pass through peacefully, Balak, again, the king of the land of Moab, hatches a plan to protect his people that is really the opposite of peace. In his kingdom, he had heard of a soothsayer, a fun, fancy word for a person who can foresee the future and perform magic. And this soothsayer, the Bible tells us, is one that could bless or curse with his words. So the king's plan was to use this soothsayer to curse the Israelites and stop them in their tracks and save his country. As you probably have guessed, that soothsayer was our bleep, Balaam. Next, the Bible tells us that the king and his entourage traveled to the soothsayer Balaam to ask for his help in cursing the Israelites and ultimately saving the land of Moab. I'm not sure that the answer that Balaam gives them is necessarily what they wanted, though. He basically says to them, listen, I hear you. I know that you want me to curse these people, but I really need to discuss it with my boss and see if it's okay. And honestly, to see if he'll give me the power to do it. What's fascinating about this story is that the boss he's referring to and the source of his power is the Old Testament God of the Bible, Yahweh. So Balaam was clearly operating and in cahoots with the same God that the people of Israel believed in. So the question becomes then, who is God going to choose in this battle? The Israelites or Balaam? And I bet you can guess which one he's going to choose. So again, we're at Balaam asking God for power. In the Old Testament, it's odd because it seems like everyone could just go willy-nilly whenever and talk to God, and this would be one of those instances. So Balaam begins to talk with God in order to seek his wisdom and power. Obviously, we see who God prefers when he answers Balaam saying, the people who they're asking you to curse are actually my favorites. They're the blessed. You are not to curse them, and in fact, I will not let you curse them. And he leaves. So clearly God chose a side, and the side was the Israelites. So Balaam now is put in this awkward position of having to say, no, I can't curse these people to his king. And honestly, I think we can feel for Balaam here. No one likes being stuck in the middle. So it's almost understandable that rather than saying, no, I was told I'm not allowed to curse these people, he says instead, let's just go to where the Israelites are and I'll see what God wants me to do when we get there, knowing full well that there truly would be no cursing when they got there. So here we are, traveling down the road on the way to the Israelites in order to curse them. And it's here on the road where we have a wild, wild turn of events. So picture it. Balaam is there riding on his donkey when suddenly, out of nowhere, the angel of the Lord appears, standing in his way, sword drawn, ready to stop Balaam. Obviously, everyone who would have seen the angel would have been terrified, especially since the angels of the Bible are not what you picture in your mind. You may think, oh my God, it's an angel. How lovely. It's probably stunning, this chiseled, cherubic winged, long-haired Fabio looking person. No. The Bible actually describes angels as having a human likeness for sure, but 4 faces and 4 wings. Straight legs with the soles of their feet like the soles of a calf's foot. If you don't know what a calf is, it's a cow. So they have calf feet, sparkling like burnished bronze, or Edward in the Twilight series. And under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands. So 4 faces, 4 wings, straight legs, feet like a calf, sparkling with tiny little hands underneath their wings. Obviously, we would all be scared. But the angel didn't actually appear to the people in the party. Instead, the only person who could see the angel was Balaam's donkey. Not Balaam, not anyone else. The angel only appears to the donkey, who promptly veers itself off the road and into the field to avoid this 4-winged thing. Honestly, there's no clear indication of why the angel only appears to the donkey, and the Bible doesn't say, so we're just going to chalk it up to one of the Bible's many mysteries. Similar to the mystery of why the Old Testament appears to hate homosexuality, but in the New Testament, Jesus, God in human form, seems cool with it and never bothers to mention it at all. Weird. Anywho, back to our story, where the donkey has just seen the angel and is rightfully freaked out. It's an absolutely chaotic scene between Balaam and his donkey. Balaam doesn't understand what is going on and begins to beat the donkey, turning it back onto the road and back onto the path. The donkey continues to freak out and slam Balaam against a wall, crushing his foot, which then causes Balaam to rage at this point and beat the donkey even more, so much so where the donkey is like, I'm over this, and lays down in the middle of the road. And this is where an already weird story takes a full left turn into fairy tale land. It's at this point that the donkey goes Shrek mode and turns to Balaam and speaks. Yes, the Bible says that the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey and he speaks. So the donkey brays at Balaam, asking, "What could I possibly have done to you that you have struck me these 3 times?" And Balaam, somehow unbothered by his talking donkey and still annoyed at said talking donkey, answers saying, "You've abused me. I wish there was a sword in my hand, for now I would kill you." The donkey replies to Balaam, which, side note, it's wild that they're having this full-on conversation, the donkey and Balaam, when the entire entourage is there. I have zero idea how they're reacting. The Bible doesn't say, but we can imagine. The donkey replies to Balaam saying, "Am I not your donkey on which you have ridden ever since I became yours to this day? Was I ever disposed to do this to you?" And it was at this point, I would suppose, that God had a good old laugh and was like, okay, enough is enough. I'm going to allow Balaam to see the angel, which is freaking out this donkey. Balaam freaked out and begged forgiveness of God, which he did not beg forgiveness of the donkey, who I think is the real victim here. But I digress. The angel tells Balaam that he certainly would have killed Balaam had not the donkey spared his life. Whew. Okay. Chaotic scene, but we've made it through. They are on their way to curse the Israelites. Angel shows up, stops them. Donkey speaks to Balaam, saying, "Why are you doing this to me?" Balaam sees Angel. Here we are. Clearly not freaked out enough to stop their journey, the people and the entourage and Balaam kept going. They kept going to the Israelites. In the next chapter, we see that the king and Balaam finally make it to Israel's camp. And it's here where we're going to fast forward the story to the end because it doesn't go super well for Balaam or for Moab. They do attempt to curse Israel, which would save them, but attempt is the key word. Because despite trying on 3 different mountains and with 42 different sacrifices, it does not work and there's no curse happening. But what does happen, and why this story is so important to the Bible and why we're bringing it up here, is that while Balaam wasn't able to curse Israel, he was able to whip out really important prophecies. Which, pause, if you don't know what a prophecy is, it's a foretelling of the future, saying what's going to happen later in time. So as I said, this story is important because one of Balaam's most impressive prophecies is that, I quote, "A star will come out of Jacob, a scepter will rise out of Israel, he will crush the foreheads of Moab and the skulls of all the people of Sheth." This is actually one of the earliest mentions that God incarnate, Jesus, will come to earth in the form of a man. And it's this idea here that really threads and holds the entire Bible together. But back to our story then. Clearly, cursing Israel did not work, and Moab fell to Israel's blade. And while you would think Balaam would be kind of celebrated for helping Israel stay safe from destruction and whipping out this cool prophecy, in fact, he's actually painted as a bad guy in the end of this story. And the reason why is, unfortunately, in later chapters of Numbers, the dude was able to get the Israelites to fall into wickedness through idolatry and sexual immorality. Balaam's later actions were actually so bad that I mentioned this earlier, but he's used as a cautionary tale centuries later in the New Testament, where the doctrine of Balaam is used to describe anything that has to do with sexual immorality. So that's it. Our dude Balaam wasn't able to curse anyone, whips out this cool prophecy, yet is vilified and categorized as an evil prophet from the Old Testament. Maybe rightly so, I don't know, maybe not, but you can decide. But honestly, you know who the real winner in this story was? The donkey, who obviously saved the Israelites from a pretty gnarly curse at the hands of Balaam by giving Balaam a piece of her mind, and who, throughout the Bible, is known for putting the ass in sass. I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Please feel free to get in touch with me and share your thoughts at badbleepsofthebible@gmail.com and Instagram at badbleepsofthebible. Sources for today's story can be found in our show notes, and please rate, review, and subscribe. My goal is to read each and every review in order to make this podcast the best that it can be. Catch you next time, and watch out for talking donkeys and angels with tiny hands and flaming swords. Bye.